parent of two. I'm an Inuk. I'm one of only 2 Inuks present at this conference at all. Wow. So we are very sparsely actually in the room. Whoa. I guess that's it.
Hi, my name is Sarah Reynolds. My pronouns are they and them. I'm Chief Marketing Officer of an HR technology company called HiBob. You won't have necessarily seen my name on the program for this one, but I'm pinch hitting for someone who couldn't make it because they were sick. So really glad to be here.
Yeah. And I'm Jessica Daconty Peterson. I like to put my traditional Liberian name in there as well, just to also honor that I am Black, mixed, Afro-Danish, Danish Liberian. I work as a project manager at a small change-making agency in Copenhagen called In Futurum. I work on DEIB as well as climate justice, so really trying to look at some of the more deeper intersections of this issue.
My name is John Michael Shirt. I am a systems change consultant living in Boise, Idaho. Originally, yeah, bring it. In a former life, a ballet dancer. And so if you're going to be at the annual tomorrow night, my husband, Brett, and I will be closing out the program at the annual. So we'll see you there. Yeah.
And my name is Alex. I'm from Lebanon, hence the Jurgensen in my last name, but I'm proudly Lebanese, and I will be facilitating the discussion today. So the first theme we're going to get into is language. First the question is to you, Nivi. You talked about how the specificity of word can lead to further fragmentation. Can you briefly share more about this and how to mitigate the resulting exclusion?
Yes and no. I think it's a very broad question, and to me, the best example I can give is the fact that a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, a lot of the titles, a lot of the ways that we describe diversity, inclusion, equity, whatever, is completely untranslatable into Galasli, to my people's language. I would not be able to describe to them or to myself in a language that are ours how to understand or what to discuss within this context. So to me, to talk about, it becomes this weird issue of talking about somebody instead of with somebody. And even though that's what we want to do, just by using all of the titles for all of these panels, all of these wordings, it becomes alienating right from the beginning. And I think that's one of the huge issues when we navigate in a language of English in particular. When we don't consider what other languages within our area can contribute with and how much power there lies within speaking English. Because in a lot of ways, English becomes this neutral language, but that's just not true, right? Like it's very alienating in so many ways. So to me, it's still, I had to Google, I think, 3 words today. And I'm an academic. I'm a museum director. If I don't understand 3 of the English words that I've been reading throughout some of the panels today, I know that many others would have left it before. I'm stubborn enough. So to me, that's so, it becomes this dynamic wanting to include and excluding in the same process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. John, you recently encountered a situation where attempts to use inclusive language led to claims of exclusion. Can you delve a little bit into this and how it occurred, why this happened, and how can we navigate this delicate balance effectively?
Yes, as mentioned, we live in Boise, and our home has been attacked 7 times now by a group of neo-Nazis. And so it's been an ongoing process working with the FBI, the Department of Justice, but really the police. And so recently the police have asked for help, services. They go through a training, inclusivity training, and I was asked to come speak with the police recently about how do you reach people in their humanity. The outreach efforts of the Boise Police Department to the LGBTQ community are laudable, but still quite lacking. And when this video was posted by the police department through their own social media, of course, never read the comments. We all know that on social media. But the comments were all about, and I was speaking as broadly as possible about humanity, but the comments were all about, he didn't mention me, I'm a Christian, or I'm Mormon, or I'm this, and I'm being excluded by what this guy is saying to the police, and he's indoctrinating them, and like, he's trying to make them just, the queer agenda. And of course, that always happens. But there is a real effort right now in rural America to push out any form of minority. In this case, most of the trans people in our community have moved away. Brett and I are very well known in the LGBTQ community, and that's partly why we've been doxxed and we continue to be attacked. So it's, at times there's this conundrum though of like, I want to do my part to actually speak to the community, but in doing so, it sets up so many new avenues of attack.
Thank you. Sarah, why is it crucial to be specific about different forms of discrimination, such as racism, homophobia, Islamophobia? And how does the specificity of these terms deepen our understanding of their impact? And also, in what ways do these distinctions influence how to address and combat systematic injustices?
I think it's a good question, because I think that, when you talk about discrimination as this sort of like large, ethereal in some ways object, right? And you don't give it a specific name, it's hard to know what to do next. So if you give it a specific name, if you say you're discriminating against me specifically because I identify as trans and non-binary, or you're discriminating against me because I'm disabled, those are two different types of discrimination. You probably said different things, they maybe hurt me in different ways. My actual experience of that is probably different. What also ends up happening is that when we give it a specific name, sometimes it helps with with what needs to happen next. If I give it a specific name, I might say, hey, this person needs some training on, not something broad and corporate and fluffy like removing unconscious bias, which I love an unconscious bias training, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't maybe go far enough, right? But specifically, maybe we need to look at workplace issues around something like the LGBTQIA+ community, or specifically the trans and non-binary community, and how we treat those people in our society, right? Maybe we specifically need some training on ableist language or on accessibility for our organization. Those are two equally valid types of interventions, but they're fundamentally different. And if I don't give name to, what is actually happening, or the experience that I'm having, or what was upsetting, and I don't give it a very specific name, it can maybe lead us to picking some of these more very broad-ranging, trying to cater to everyone types of programming that ultimately, maybe sort of like whitewash a little bit away the effect that we're trying to have those programs have on the person who we want them to really impact.
Thank you. Jessica, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on everything, because I think the reason why we're speaking about language right now is also the power that language holds in really positioning us and each other against each other, but also how we are in relation to each other and what kind of reality and experiences that are part of that language or gets to exist. So what I'm also hearing is that part of that more kind of buzzword or general way of speaking about DEIB also hides away the power that's actually inherently part of it, and even being able to take care of that agenda in the first place. So I think it's with what you're speaking about in terms of naming each of the different forms of discrimination, it's also about speaking forward what's been invisibilized. And that is that power relation or power dynamic that is involved in even being able to take up the agenda, form the agenda, being the one who sets the definition and agenda for how diversity and inclusion work is supposed to look at. So yeah, just to say that that's the tension that's involved in also having to speak on language and why that is so important.
Yeah, for me, as a journalist, the way how I can reflect on that is I can give an example. In the last 3 days, as you know, we've been facing a war in Lebanon, and so far 1,400 civilians have been killed. And I saw the power of language, because I know a lot of people who died personally. My brother lost his wife, family, all of them. But the way how Israel is addressing this new genocide in Lebanon through language, just to justify it. And discriminate against us and call us terrorists. And like language is very powerful. It can be used to justify a genocide as well, to justify racism. And yeah, thank you for these powerful insights. We're gonna.
Can I add?
Yes, sure.
We talked about the difference between a leader and an activist. I feel like in this conference, we've already been divided in between you are leaders and you are different than the activists. And then the activist gets one state and the leaders that are the traditional leaders gets the other state. And I think it's the same kind of tension between being an activist or a freedom fighter or a terrorist.
Yeah.
There is so much power in that naming.
Yeah.
Whether you name it a leader or an activist, or whether you name it a change maker or a leader.
Yeah, right. Now we're going to talk about systems and inclusion, and the question is to Jessica. Consider the role of systems change in either reinforcing or dismantling various forms of oppression, including racism, sexism. What specific system overhauls are required to genuinely address these injustices? And what does it take to redesign systems in a way to achieve real justice? You can reflect from work, example, society.
Yeah, it's a very big and complex question, but thank you for that. I will try to set the scene for it, but I think maybe we should start by, again, now that we are on the topic of language, actually maybe setting the scene for what systems change is. That is addressing the root causes of any kind of marginalization or oppression, or any of the conflicts or crises that we're currently seeing in the world. So it is taking a more macro and holistic view in terms of some of the bigger societal issues that's going on, but also seeing it in a global context. What are some of the connections that bring us together as human beings? What are some of the structures and systems that have shaped our reality, shaped our experiences? And that's why, in terms of also understanding what kind of impact the language and power has, it is by taking a more structural lens in terms of saying who are defining what, and why is it that something has become the given truth and has become the fixed truth, or at least the status quo. And in terms of driving that overhaul, or actually digging into and investigating those social issues that are at hand, it's also where we do see that a lot of us are affected by the same systems of oppression, whether it be colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, whether you are able-bodied. It's really where we see how all of our struggles are connected. So in terms of the overhauls or the transformation we need for justice, there are many, many layers. And I think I'll go back to something that has been mentioned a lot already, and that is terms of this lens of equity, actually understanding what needs human beings and other people and non-human species have on this planet, because now I'm also, since we are on this systemic level, let's look at our planet as an ecosystem. We are here in connection with each other. And so first part of that is really understanding what are the structures affecting me, how am I benefiting from it, what am I not seeing, what are my blind spots. The second part of it is also understanding who is then part of shaping my reality, who's part of the spaces that I intervene in. What is the power that is part of that, especially in terms of who are the gatekeepers, who are the ones setting the agenda, but also who are the ones breaking the glass ceiling or breaking in doors in terms of trying to create that space that has not been there for them historically. So it really becomes about investigating how we are both benefiting from a lot of these systems because of the privilege that we have, and then also seeing who are then not here with us because of the barriers that are there. And I would say that's a very short way of understanding systems change. Yeah.
Thank you. John, given your positive experience in building solidarity with local community, and law enforcement, how can we foster similar respect and support in communities where there is some sort of a systematic backing, particularly for those who are racialized or trans, for example? What strategies can be implemented?
I mean, well, first, the expression, there are no broken systems, every system is optimized to do what it's doing. And that's the first thing that comes to mind in what you just shared. And so I feel there's a real lack of us collectively truly diagnosing the current reality that we live in, because it is so fractured, and we have our own perspectives, and we know we're stuck in our echo chambers, and there are gatekeepers, and there are those that are kept from. And so the first is, to your question, is, and this is simple, but solidarity. Are there enough people stepping forward together to assert a certain truth? So the first time the progress flag on our house was set on fire, and our request, well, first of all, Brett and I are incredibly privileged. Like, we are safe. Yes, our home is being attacked, but if I was a Latina trans woman living in Idaho, I wouldn't have the safety to speak up. So we chose to use our privilege to go very public with the media, with the elected officials, with the police. But it wasn't just us. Our ask was, we want 1,000 new flags to go up. Like, if they burn one down, put 1,000 more up. And it happened. And so now when you walk around in areas of our town, Boise, you see progress flags flying. So I think that solidarity is, of course, super important, representation, but that there's a group of people stepping forward together. So of course we know allyship, we know, even if you don't have a queer person in your family, even if you're not queer, can you show up for others? So that's one strategy. It didn't stop the attacks on our home. Our home has been attacked 4 more times. And so the next then layer becomes, how do you both work with authority, like the law enforcement, but challenge them at the same time to say, what you're doing is not good enough. It's great that you have an LGBTQIA plus liaison officer. Is your entire command staff trained in cultural competencies? And it's the simple things, of course, like not referring to us as partners, but husbands, like respecting us as they come into our home. And so then how do you partner with authority and hold them accountable? Now you can do that individually, but that's also not enough. How do we continue to say, here's the standard by which we expect you to meet? I'll stop there, but those are 2 of the strategies that we've been enacting.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add something, Nivi, or?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about this, about qualifications. We're way too quick to not consider culture as a part of qualification or gender, or we're way too quick to not use that as an asset within forces. Because in a Greenlandic context, a lot of the officers we have are primarily Danish speaking. We have Greenlandic ones as well. But to have a force not being able to speak the local language makes so many barriers, or even to understand the culture or whatever is going on. And I think that goes for every part of it. We need people inside who sees us and sees the situation that we're in to be able to mediate.
To see it and to feel it. We also can't just stay in the headspace. It has to be visceral. We have to make it real. And we have to give representation, and we have to tell these stories, and they have to reach more than just our echo chambers. Because until we are hitting the head and the heart, nothing's going to change. We know that change really happens in behaviors. If you're not addressing norms and changing systemic behaviors, and it's all just in the headspace. And I think that's some of what we're discussing. Like, we can use the words and the language, but we have to embody it. And we have to get those that we're working with to feel it.
Sarah, would you like to add something?
I would agree. I think that while you asked me earlier about why it's important to be specific, right? There's also the power in coming together, and you shouldn't let the fact that you need to be specific about what's happening with your language distract you from the fact that there's power in groups. Like, it's very easy sometimes to dismiss the activities that go on to benefit certain communities as like, oh, it's for a minority group in society, in the workplace, et cetera. But the reality is that in these, for lack of a better term, like a voting bloc, right? You have much more power and you have more ability to influence without authority, the authority, when suddenly you make up a much larger portion of the overall population that they're considering. And so I think that there's, while it's important to be specific, in the US, sometimes people criticize what they call the Tumblrization of identity, which is like, well, an example would be like, I identify as pansexual and you identify as bisexual, and those are two very distinct things, and we have nothing in common. Like, in reality, we all are members of the LGBTQI plus community. I actually think that while it's a big acronym and an ever increasing one, and one that's difficult for folks who don't speak English to say, especially at speed, it's something that represents the value of community. Because as a combined entity of LGBTQI plus, we have a much bigger chance at having an impact on, especially an authority that isn't really set up to want to listen to you to begin with.
The next theme we want to explore is power. Earlier, Nivi, you spoke about the paradox in Greenland, that despite majority of Greenland are Greenlandic, but power is still with Danish leaders. And you also mentioned that sometimes excluding certain groups is seen as a necessity to empower marginalized group. What steps can we take to shift power meaningfully without simply replicating existing systems of oppression?
I think it's a truth with modifications, because we have the power in Galashnunat, we have the power to change it ourselves. We have our own government, we have a lot of power as indigenous community, we have the majority in our own country, we have our own rights. So we have a lot of power internally, but at the same time we see a lot of the private companies still have Danish CEOs or Danish leadership. And I think we lack an acknowledgement of how important capacity building really is. Because we tend to have a reaction that goes, right now we need this in the company, right now we need this kind of person to make this kind of solution. And I think I reacted a little bit to it at one of the panels in the morning with the leadership panel, where one of them said that we need to really look into our institution and consider what we need right now to solve it. I would challenge it and say we need to look into our institutions and say what we need in 10 years. Because if we just look at whatever we need now, we will just keep on reproducing whatever we have, or keep on reproducing all the issues. And in Galashnunat, we really need Galaslit leaderships. We really need Galaslit Inuit leaders to be the leaders of our communities. And for that to happen, we need to be bold and put them into positions where they will become leaders. And that power lies in many ways with white males. And if they don't acknowledge how important that capacity building is right now, this will just keep on being the issue. We will just keep on moving that forward. And I think one of the things that they talked about a lot this morning was fear. And I think there lies a lot within this area of fear, because it might influence your situation right now. It might not be whatever your institution needs right at this moment, right at this point. It would be easier if we got the one who already had all the qualifications. But in reality, it will be a better solution if we look just 2, 3, 4, 10 years ahead. And I think that's one of the big issues right now.
There's also, yeah. Do you find sometimes there's also the next step, which is because of systemic oppression and indoctrination, people that are not currently of the ruling class or decision makers don't see themselves as worthy to be in that position, or they don't feel prepared. And we see this a lot in the States.
That's fear.
Yeah, and we put people in positions of power that are of a marginalized class, and then we expect them to still act like the person they're replacing. Like you put a black woman in charge of a big business, but you expect her to still act like a white man. And you also haven't prepared themselves for that identity shift. That's a big issue.
Sarah, complex social issues like racism and phobias cannot be reduced to simple terms. How can we ensure that discussions around them capture their full complexity and we avoid oversimplifying them?
I think that, joy and challenge of human nature is that it's like incredibly complex and nuanced. Like the joy and challenge of language is that it's incredibly complex and nuanced, right? And I think that as we think about, how we address and maybe try to unpack and try and put in some of these interventions in place, we want to find a way to give the right name to something and to make an impact as a collective group, and to ultimately move the ball forward so that we're not, stuck in the same place for the next 10 years. I think like language is so important to me, especially when you think about things like case law, when it's, discrimination focused. I'm not a lawyer, quick sidebar. But in the EU, for example, and in Europe more broadly, and certainly in the US, if you think about the way that discrimination manifests for all of us, it's intersectional, right? Your identity is intersectional. You can be discriminated, based on all of the different facets of your identity. But case law is based almost entirely on single points of discrimination, or on sequential discrimination. So I was discriminated against because I was non-binary. I was discriminated against because I was queer, and that was a separate incident. And I was discriminated because I was disabled, and that was a separate incident. And case law allows me to attack each of those separate incidences. What it doesn't account for is additive discrimination. I'm discriminated against because I'm all of those things. And in fact, the discrimination gets worse. It's not enough that I'm non-binary. I also have to be, loud about being queer, and I also have to be loud about being disabled, right? And then you can also think about like truly, intersectional discrimination, which is, even more complex than just additive. I think that when you think about, the realities of navigating this work and the realities of pushing back in the current system that we have, in the way that it's set up, you have to be extremely specific, because the system forces you to say, well, there's no way of dealing with the idea that you perceive the discrimination to be worse because you're a member of these multiple identity groups. You have to give me the name of one of them that we can actually take action against, or to take primary action against.
Jessica, you work at the intersection of sustainability and social justice in the art sector and culture. So the push of sustainability often reinforces already existing power structures, such as classism and racism, potentially marginalizing communities already struggling with that sort of a systematic oppression. How can sustainability initiatives avoid these imbalances? And instead, for example, how can the systems maintain inequality and exclusion in a way to fight it?
Yeah. I think the reason why the current way of doing sustainable practices, or at least saying that maybe there's been a power grab of sustainability and it becoming a buzzword, is also what we've been wavering around already in terms of it being based on existing ways of understanding society, understanding value, and also how people and nature and resources contribute to an economic system. And now that we're here naming the different isms, I would say that it is because of racial capitalism, and that each person and human being has to have some kind of value to the system. They have to be a benefiter of the system, and they have to be able to give something back to the system. And that's where sustainability currently tries to prioritize economic growth and profit over the general maintenance and sustenance of the planet that we have and the people that are also here and are using it. And that was also what Aslak Holmberg's keynote earlier today spoke about, in terms of all of these green and carbon neutral projects trying to continue the system and the same practices and ways of doing business in order to continue growth, in order to continue making profit. And so in order to actually create something that is more just, it is also figuring out how do we sustain ourselves currently. And that means interrogating what exactly does everyone need? What are the needs of the planet? What are the needs of all of the different human beings here? And seeing how do we improve the material conditions for everyone? Because right now, even if we look at the issue globally, we are having actors that are trying to take from the common pool of resources known as the planet rare and critical mineral earth resources, and seeing how can we level out that and make sure that everyone have more access to those resources and are able to develop and grow and sustain themselves. So that's one part of it. The second part, and this is also something that came to mind, also just hearing all of you speak about what's currently happening in terms of culture and some of the shifts that needs to take place, and why it is that the current systems are enforcing power positions, is also this coloniality concept. So how we still have to interrogate how we are as human beings in relationship with each other. How is it that we're always extracting things from each other? And that's the basis for many of our relationships, especially when we look at it in terms of organizations and corporations. It is, what value are you bringing onto our organization? But it's also in the way that we know, and that's where it becomes super crucial, what you're talking about, Nivi, in terms of capacity building and making sure that we're having more lived experiences within different institutions, because that's also then where we can actually pinpoint and close some of those gaps in terms of who actually gets a share of the wealth and the resources. Yeah.
So in the last 5 minutes we're going to share some practical, actionable takeaways. John, during our preparation call, you mentioned that in the States, if you name identity, others feel excluded. This is a question for everyone. We're going to start from John. In your opinion, what are some practical ways to engage and with and mitigate this reaction?
I mean, to Sarah's point, to many of the points, find intersectionality, find commonality. I think if you stay too isolated in one ism or one identity, it doesn't allow for more of a horizontal coming together. So what is that commonality by which you can reach a wider group? And then with that block, you have voting power. You have the ability to sway public opinion. And I think sometimes we stay too closely within our smaller networks. So what are the they're not simple, but the horizontal ways you can touch other groups' humanities and bring them to the cause?
Jessica.
I would say, since we do live in a globalized racial capitalist system, I think there's a huge part about redistribution and also ensuring how, and this is what goes back to your point about solidarity, in the places where I have power and privilege, how can I also be part of helping others achieve that? And equally also give them access to a pool. So this could be from the smallest thing as when you are looking for knowledge, or when you are seeking new projects and partnerships in your workplaces. Look for those that would normally not be there and ensure that their voices are heard, or at least are part of that conversation.
Thank you. Sarah.
A lot of the pushback against DEI work is quite loud. And, you know, a lot of it comes in the sort of framework of, well, you're making me uncomfortable, or, you know, you're making me feel excluded. I think the reality is, if you're a member of a marginalized group in any situation, you've had the experience of being uncomfortable for other reasons, and you've probably even had the experience of feeling unsafe. A long while ago, I decided that if I had to be uncomfortable, so did other people. So, for example, and I have a privilege associated with who I am and the title that I have at work and stuff like that, which I completely acknowledge. But for example, if someone gets my pronouns wrong, I correct them. And I don't care how many times you tell me that it makes you uncomfortable and you feel like I'm pointing out your fault. You got it wrong. You called me by pronouns that are not my own. Imagine if I walked around and called you Susan. Like, that wouldn't be tolerated. So why is this such an issue? I think you can try and limit the conflict of that and have an offline discussion where you're reaching across the aisle and you're more empathetic and you're finding that commonality. But at the ultimate end of the day, if you get them wrong, I'm gonna correct them for you.
Thank you. Nivi.
I totally agree. And in the same line, I was about to say that we have a huge issue in the Nordic countries where we consider ourselves a place with a lot of space and tolerant. We need to call it out because we are not that. And there's a 2030 vision that the Nordics should be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world by 2030. And I'm like, it is so much not acknowledging the fact that we are so far behind. And I was so happy about listening. Like, I'm so in awe whenever I engage with people from Canada and the way that they have been working with Indigenous communities, the way that they have been angling this issue. We just heard it in the previous panel, how the ambassador was so humbled, so addressing it directly, saying, we've been doing so much harm. We've been so harmful to the communities. We have to learn, we have to change. We're doing mistakes day by day, but we have to change those mistakes. We never hear the Nordic politicians talk like that. We never hear them acknowledge the fact that they are making mistakes, that we are making mistakes. And as long as we think that we're ahead, as long as we are at that point, it's difficult to be the one saying, hey, no, we're not. Hey, no, we're not where we're supposed to be. Hey, that vision is amazing. Let's do it. But we really need systemic change for that to happen by 2030.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the last 30 seconds, we exceeded the time. I will just allow myself to jump over the topic, if you allow me. I do have my mom and my sister who are stuck under bombing today in Lebanon. And I'm sorry, I was not even able to prepare for the presentation as I should, because you saw I was reading mostly the script. My message for you, every time you share something in social media, you're making a difference. I don't know if I will be able to see my mom. I already lost friends, aunt, cousins, and most likely she will lose her life in the war because we're dealing with like a brutal terrorist attack. So please keep talking about all topics we spoke about today, justice, inclusion, diversity, but also don't forget Lebanon and Palestine, because we're facing a brutal attack. And it's not okay that someone my age stands on a stage while his mom is texting him every 5 minutes, telling him I'm still alive, and I don't know when she's going to lose her life. We need your help, and your voice matters a lot. You can make a power, and you can stop the war by pushing and sharing and boycotting and protesting. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I had to say this.